Today we have an iPhone 11, cracked back glass, and housing. We are doing the housing replacement, which for the majority of you is going to be the way to go, as most of us don't have a several $1,000 laser lying around to accurately take off all this glass. So here we go. The tools that we'll need are a pencil lobe, a Phillips, did that out of order, pencil lobe, Phillips, a pry tool, something to remove the screen, a nylon spudger, a tri-wing bit, a tri-wing or tri-point screwdriver or bit, as well as a standoff bit. Looks a little bit like this. iFixit, as you can see, is where I get both of my drivers and bits from. I use 3 different tweezers for various things inside of the device, but you can get away with not so many. We'll go over that later on in the video. It's not necessary. I highly suggest something to organize these screws. I use, this one's rather small. This is, I'm working out of my car today, so this is my magnetic mat. You just as easily can use packing tape, just something so that the screws don't slide around. If you have to move your workstation, or if you're working on a kitchen table and you need to set it aside, you can just as easily pick up. Same thing with packing tape. You can pick up the packing tape, put it on a plate, move it around. And this greatly helps, but I use something to heat up different portions of the device, mainly just the for screen removal, and a couple of other bits on the charging port needs to be transferred over, wireless charger. Pretty much all the flex cables have some form of adhesive, and it helps to heat up the back of the device, heat up the flex cable to easily remove and transplant the flex cables from one housing to another. So let's get started. So we start off by powering off the device. Use your pencil lobe to remove the 2 screws, holding the screen down. The XR and the 11 are notorious for having, let's just say the screen is slightly more difficult to remove, especially if you are trying to reuse the screen. Obviously, if your screen is just obliterated, you don't need to take nearly as much care. If the screen is broken, and obviously you're going to reuse it, who cares, whatever. But for anyone that is planning to reuse your screen, transplant your screen from one housing to the other. As a general rule, obviously be as light as possible, light-handed. You have all this adhesive right here. On pretty much every device since the iPhone 7, all of the devices open up and to the right. The newer 12s don't, but iPhone 7 through the 11 Pro Max series opens like a book to the right. The screen, you always want to tilt down and to the left, almost like that, and then it makes it easier to open up. And now we start with removing pretty much everything from the device. Something that I do wherever possible is to do the device in stages. So rather than taking every single piece, every component from the device, I'll do it in stages. So typically I'll do the top first or the bottom first. I'll show you in just a sec. Whenever you're working on any devices, before connecting or disconnecting anything, we always want to make sure to disconnect the battery. On this particular model, the iPhone 11, the safe spot is using your pry tool or fingernail right on top, basically right here. Now I use tweezers, but you can use a pry tool if you like. Be very careful. Usually on this particular model, on the 11, I lift up, I guess this would be bottom left, or if the device was positioned this way, it would be top left, but right here. Set the screen aside for now. Now begins the long and arduous process of gutting the phone. For the rear camera, I lift up on the flex cable, lower, this would be lower left. Either use your pry tool or tweezers. If there's one reason you should use one over the other, metal. If you're not sure of yourself, if you're a little bit heavier handed, then I'd suggest using a pry tool. If you slip, you're less likely to damage or gouge different parts versus metal, especially around a battery when you haven't removed the battery. Set the camera aside. Now to remove the there's a bit of adhesive. Either use either end of your nylon spudger to lift up. There's also a little bit of adhesive right Here, I just used the flat end, gently sliced away. Now you can do this at several different stages, but as we're here, I'll begin removing the battery. I forgot to mention this. When going over the tools, but if you have isopropyl rubbing alcohol, it can make removing the battery tabs significantly easier. It makes them much less likely to tear, which this one is about to tear. It helps if you can lift up this little tab on the top. Once the adhesive is out just a little bit, I take just a couple of drops, wiggle back and forth. You should feel some resistance. That does it for the adhesive, the 3 pieces of adhesive up top. Next we have the tabs below. As a general rule, in any model, when removing the battery, if there are components you can remove, specifically the Taptic engine and or loudspeaker, I would certainly suggest doing so, as it makes two things. It makes it less likely to, makes it easier as I'll show you in just a sec, but you're less likely to tear the battery adhesives strips, which ultimately makes it easier for you to remove the battery, especially if you have to reuse it. On the 11 series, keep in mind, if you do damage the battery, obviously batteries, you can replace them. One of the aggravating parts about the XR and forwards, the XR, the 11s, is that if you remove the battery is paired to the original battery is paired to the motherboard. So upon replacing the battery, there's a little message that'll show up in your settings, which is really annoying, just saying that your battery can't confirm that it's genuine. So ideally, we would reuse the battery, or we're going to reuse the battery. Lift up on the Taptic engine right here. Take your Taptic engine, set it aside. Next, we're removing the loudspeaker. So for the loudspeaker, these two screws right here are standoff screws. So you need your standoff bit. A flathead works, but you're much better off using a standoff if you can. Next we have these battery strips at the bottom. Usually I start by putting a few drops of adhesive or alcohol. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but you want 91 or 91% or better, as the possibility of damaging your motherboard or corroding any components is slim to none. As you can see, well, actually you can't really see, but the battery adhesive strips are longest here and here, very short. It's about that long up here. Obviously this one is slightly longer. These two down here, just, you might want to watch the video ahead. It just gives you a better idea of when removing the battery. Take your battery, set it aside. Now we can move on to removing the board and SIM tray. There's a retaining plate for 3 flex cables that has this little hook right here. For the time being, we're just going to leave this here. We're going to move on to the last stand-up screw. 3 stand-up screws, 1, 2, 3. Next, we're going to lift up on the charging port, flex cable. Once again, you can use your fingernail, just like that, either side, left or right, just like that. This retaining plate, lift up and away. Either use a paper clip or something to remove the SIM card tray. Remove and set aside. There's a little pin. Push down. It'll make it easier to remove the SIM card tray. So we have 2 screws for the SIM card tray, both Phillips. This little piece right here, take that, set it aside. Now at this point, the SIM card tray, don't lift it out. It's still connected to the board. This flex right here. There's quite a bit of components and flex cables right around here, so be gentle. lift back the charging port flex, lift up and away. Now we have the wireless charger. We have another part of the charge port. At this point, well, usually I feel like this is what's going to happen to most people, so I'll just get this on video. But this particular bracket, sometimes it stays on, sometimes it comes off. But pretty much you want to lift up. Just like that, and then it comes free. Now, obviously, we still have 3 flex cables up here. Gently fold back. Same with this. And then the last one that we have, board comes free. Now I'm doing this in one sitting, but on the off chance if you are not, I would highly suggest setting the board along with the front camera, rear camera, put it in some sort of plastic bag. You don't have to seal it up, just we don't want ambient dust getting in any of these connectors. As for the cameras, if dust gets on the camera lens, then you'd have to replace it if it gets bad enough. The unfortunate part to the front camera is that it controls Face ID. And the last thing you want to do is damage that, because if you do, you're screwed. That part can't, I mean, it can be replaced in the sense that it is a modular component that is replaceable, but it's not in the sense that the equipment is paired to the board, just like the battery. And if you do, Face ID is no longer functional. So obviously that's one of those things, you get one shot, try not to mess it up. Now we can move on to removing the charging port. We have 2 more standoff screws, 1 and 2, right here, underneath. I don't know what you'd call this, but there's a little piece right there. Now this is the part where we remove the charging port. I'm getting ahead of myself. I always forget this. There's 2 Phillips. Right here and right here. Now we're good to go. For whatever reason, there is one last standoff. It's not actually a part or holding down any flex cables, it's just in the frame. So we need to make sure to transfer that over, or else it'll make reinstall kind of funky. Now the majority of the adhesive is going to be right here. There's going to be some along here. This is the part where you would use a hair dryer or a hot air gun. I'm using a hot air gun. You should be able to set your hand down for about maybe 2 or 3 seconds before it's too hot to touch. Once you do, as we see, there's adhesive right there and then none. After that, lift up. There's some more adhesive right along this little pad. Come underneath, sort of wiggle it along. And we have some more right underneath here. Now here's the next part where you should be very careful. Once again, this is a part in this particular repair that we are reusing. You have to remove the front microphones. Usually what I suggest doing is be as gentle as you can. Lift up and away. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, another way is just lift up just like this. There's adhesive holding the charging port. There's quite a bit of it here around the charging port. And apparently the bit that's stuck to this end is stuck to this bracket over here, this plastic piece. Take the charge port, set it aside. Now, some housings have these installed, in which case you can sort of skip this part. But the housings that I get, let me just double check, just for comparison, do not have this plastic, either one of these plastic pieces or the mesh that sits in between the housing and the plastic piece. It's meant to prevent dust and channels the audio here and here. And there's a piece that lines up with the speaker right there, the speaker holes. So the parts that I get, the housings that I get, don't have those. So we need to skillfully remove. Use heat. Usually, if you have one of these, I feel that it's easiest. You can sort of cut away at the adhesive holding. We have 1, 2, one of my least favorite parts. This is going to be a pain in the ass for some of you. It took me a while, but if ideally used curved or some sort of pointed tweezers, they have these plastic inserts. There's nothing holding them in. Or at least there's no adhesive holding them in. They're just resting in there. So you don't have to use too much force to remove them. They are angled in such a way that when you reinstall them, you can't just install them whichever way you like. They are supposed to be positioned in a specific way. You can do this now or after, but remove the pin for the SIM tray. I find it best to just transfer this over. Drop that in the new frame. Now the last thing is we have the mesh. In this case, it's 5. So there's for all of these speaker holes, speaker/microphone holes. You can do this cold, but you're more than likely going to deform them. Usually I suggest using a little bit of heat, not nearly as much heat as you would to remove the charging pad or any of the antennas up top. Just a little bit. So there's one of a couple of ways. This is once again where I find pointed tweezers to be quite useful. I use a combination of curved tweezers. I gently, just at the far end, tool holes, you lift up. Sometimes, yeah, just do that. Use another set of tweezers, lift out. Lift up and out. So this is going to be kind of difficult to get on camera, but ideally, if you have curved tweezers, you want to try to stay to the inside or outside of this particular hole. So if you're coming here, you either want to press sort of up and, you want to stay to one side or the other, so the inside or the outside. The last thing you want to do is, maybe not last thing, but you want to avoid punching a hole in the middle of the mesh. They come out relatively simple. They do have a tendency to retreat back into their hole, which is what I use the 2 set of tweezers for. Now, all 4 of these speaker mesh are interchangeable. Obviously you have the one that's 1x4. This can only go here. I don't know if you can get this on, I don't know if I can get this on camera very easy, but on pretty much all of them there's a flat spot, and then so the way you want to reinstall them is the flat part is supposed to be up top, which is supposed to be here, and then the part closest to the frame, so right here there's sort of ridges. So the way we want to install it is with the ridges facing us. This is where the curved tweezers help out a little bit. Same thing with this plastic piece, flat top, and then you have these ridges. Now, you'll notice, I don't know if you can tell. Let me see, where's my camera? Right here, we have, I don't know if you can tell this, but the flat part is down here, and then there's a sort of angled, slanted. You want the slanted portion to be facing up, the flat part to be facing down. This might take you a couple of attempts. and they sort of just sit in there. They do have a tendency to want to fall out. So if you set it flat on the table, then honestly, just expect them to roll around. So here we have the, I don't know what you would call this, the plastic piece for the right side, and it should go in just like this. Microphone hole to the left, speaker hole to the right. There's an alignment pin. You can see it right here, which is supposed to go in this hole. If the adhesive, because there is a bit of adhesive that's left over, ideally, if you use enough heat, not too much, if you use just the right amount of heat, the adhesive strip will come up and off of the old housing. If you don't and it gets tangled or ruined, it's not completely necessary for reinstall. Ultimately, there's going to be enough pressure from the screws and basically from everything being, you know, it'll be held in place without adhesive. So really all you need to do is just drop it in and it'll stay in place once you reinstall the charging port. Same thing here. We have the alignment pin, which goes right here. So we drop this in. And that's that. Now for the charging port. A trick that I use is, before I start tightening everything, is to plug your charging port. You want to make sure that you hear that click and that it snaps into place. There's no room. You shouldn't see any silver from the charging port. If you could do, it could be one of a couple of things. One, your charging port could just be dirty, which happens a lot of the times with, I don't know, people that work in construction or the military or contractors. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Anyone that, I don't know, your phone gets dirty if you go hiking, camping a lot, whatever. But in a ideal world, you know, you're supposed to hear that snap. If it's not, if it's off kilter, maybe your charging port isn't aligned properly. So make sure that you test this first before installing everything else, because I've done this before where I get ahead of myself. I start reinstalling everything. I close the entire phone. I throw everything back in, and then the charging port doesn't work, and I have to take everything out again. Learn from my mistakes. Don't do that. So we have a couple of standoff screws. So this plastic piece goes in first. Remember this, we're not doing anything with this yet. We install the second standoff screw. So 1 right there, 2, 3. Sort of have to tuck the flex cable in just like that. Sometimes you need to use tweezers. So we'll leave that there for now. Now we install the loudspeaker. Remember, we have 2 standoff screws here. The second one here. This you might run into where it's off kilter just a little bit. Make sure that these 2 screw holes line up with the corresponding posts, or you're going to have to backtrack. We have 1 Phillips. Onto the Taptic engine. You don't use much force. It should snap in pretty easily. Then we have two Phillips to the left. We have a retaining plate for the Taptic engine, held down by 1 Phillips. We have a slightly longer Phillips, which holds down the left side of the speaker. Then we come in with our plate. All of these are Phillips. They used a lot more Phillips in the 11 and XR models. In the 10s, 10S, 10S Max, they use quite a bit more tri-wing in the charging port, which is kind of annoying because you're going back and forth with different bits. You might have noticed there that I was tightening all the screws, and then it wasn't aligned properly. I undid maybe a quarter, half a turn, loosened it just enough to align it properly, then tightened everything back up. Now we have our SIM tray, which goes just like this. So you want to lift up that. So the large wide is on top. Immediately next is your SIM, and then last is that one. Same thing here. As you can see, we have different ports. We have different posts, screw posts. And remember, we have this little thing that we drop into place. Last but not least, you want to make sure that this hole lines up properly. Take your SIM card tray, pop it in. This isn't necessary, but I have it. I didn't mess it up. We'll drop that back in place. That's our charging port. As you can see, I have a rather limited, small magnetic plate. So it's far easier, in my experience, to take the phone apart in different steps. Next, we move on to these side brackets. These are, I'd say, important. Make sure to do them. They may not seem important. What the heck do they do? They are what hold these drop in. That's what keeps the screen snapped in. It's not just these two pentalobe screws at the bottom like everyone thinks. The side, those clip in. That's basically what keeps the device, the screen, clamped down. So we have those. We have two on one side, two on the other. If for whatever reason you mix up the screws, these screws are all the same size. Furthermore, they go into the frame. So you don't have to be nearly as careful. You obviously, maybe not obviously, but you want the bracket, you want it facing up. That's what the screen slots into. Now for the left side, now that those are done, we can move on to the flex cables, volume buttons, mute switch, all these antennas. Can't forget about our trusty wireless charging pad. Just for a bit of context, there's adhesive along the perimeter, not in the center. And there might be a little bit, but the majority of at least what's going to put up a fight is along the perimeter in corners. 1, 2, 3, 4. Usually I start at the bottom here see this person's is cracked along the back. You can actually see right through it right there. But we got the first corner up. Once you get the first corner up, it's quite a bit easier to just peel up. If it's fighting you and you feel like you're going to tear it, just use some more adhesive. Oh, not more adhesive. Use more heat. But as you can see, this is what the underside of it looks like. There's adhesive here, 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 and here. So I'm going to set this aside for the time being and work on. So this is the first tri-wing that we're going to have encountered in a while. You have these plastic coverings. I don't reuse them. You can take them, throw them away. They don't really serve any purpose from what I've found. There is a small bit of tape covering one of the Phillips holding in the volume. Just like that. If you really don't want to mess with it too much, you can start unscrewing. Just set your Phillips right over the tape and have at it. There are 4 Phillips, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the volume and mute switch. Then we have 2 Phillips along the top. We have another tri-wing and 2 more Phillips. Tilt the device at a 90-degree angle. Remove those. So Apple, sneaky as they are, did I forgot. On one of the models, it's a tri-wing. So they hide a screw. They put a little piece of tape over it. As you can see, I didn't bother peeling it off. I just set my Phillips down. So right there, that's a Phillips. Set that aside. We then have a tri-wing, which sits right about there. Usually what I find it easiest to do is come along and remove this particular flex. This antenna first. There is a bit of adhesive holding this part of the flex cable down. It's approximately right there. Just use the flat end of your spudger, wedge it in there, and you're good to go. Now back to our tri-wing. Remove that. This next part is going to be a little bit tricky because some of this adhesive doesn't come off as easy, or at least access to these two is not as cut and dry as some of the previous antennas, or some of the previous things that needed to be removed. So yeah, you shouldn't be able to, should be warm enough that you shouldn't be able to, should be hot to the touch. Now, here's what I mean by tricky. Lift up. Now, sometimes this does happen, but the glass is so broken right here. Pretty much we have, well, let's say we have to be very careful here because we don't want to sever this flex cable. We're gonna have to carefully peel some of this glass off. So I had to do this off of camera, but this is what we're supposed to look like afterwards. This part is sort of hanging there, but everything is still connected there, so we'll test this before closing up the device, but should be good to go. The last antenna that we have, so the two screws that we removed from here and here hold down a bracket. As you can see, there's a little tab, which is right here, that slots into this piece right here. So, next, we have the volume buttons. They have these little, I don't know, hanging loop things that I find kind of annoying. Pretty much you just want to use tweezers. I find curved tweezers help me a little bit easier, but just push one way or the other. You can. I don't reinstall these. I don't know why Apple even has them there. I've done hundreds of housings and I've never had any issue not reinstalling these. You can, I mean, there's just little on the left and right of the on the outside of the button. There are these little holes. You line it up, wham bam, done. For the rest of you that don't want to bother, which includes me, I don't. I just throw them out. So all buttons swing up. They tilt up 90 degrees. As you can see, the button looks, or the inside bracket looks something like that. You just pull directly out and pop the buttons out. Depending on how dirty these are, you might want to clean them off. For the average person, this is probably not that necessary. I'll try to get this on camera. But your button, let's see. Yeah, this is kind of difficult. There's pretty much one slot, one groove to slot it into. I use the butt of my tweezers. You'll hear a little click, you might have just heard that. And then that's that. Next we need to remove, there's an antenna, 2 screws, 2 Phillips. And this antenna comes out. It's not really held in with any adhesive of any sort. Next is the power button, rear mic and flash flex cable. Use some heat. Use a pry. Lift up on the microphone. The microphone has two alignment pins here and here. Just sort of lift up at a 90-degree angle. The flash pops out from the other side. Just push through. It'll pop out. After this, we have, now some have, some don't. It's just fighting me. But this little piece right here needs to be transferred over. You sort of have to pivot this out like so. Make sure to remove the rear mic mesh. So here's that little hanger. Remove the button, same technique as last time. There's a little hole, you can kind of see it right there, a little tube. You just have to sort of finagle it in there. Once that's done, drop your mic. You don't really need to align that too much. It'll just align itself. Take your two Phillips for your power button, drop these. Make sure it clicks properly. If it doesn't click properly, but it works, I guess we wouldn't really know that until we drop the board in. Just something to keep in mind. But typically you want it to click properly. If it's not, it might be too tight, in which case, well, unscrew just a turn or so. big Phillips and a small Phillips. After that is our mute switch. Typically what I start with is aligning the mute switch first. Then you have this little piece right here. You want to fit that in between the frame and the mute switch bracket. And from here I go left to right. I usually stop before I put in the last screw. Make sure that the buttons click properly, that the switch works. Next, we can move on to the last antenna. I find it easiest to start in the upper left. Drop these two Phillips in. Make sure to reconnect that flex cable. This little piece is supposed to be aligned like so. Take your tri-wing. Sometimes it helps, it wants to go haywire on you. Make sure to take your tweezers, just set it in place so that it doesn't come out of alignment. Take this bracket, so I did this a little bit out of order, but we can still get this done. So we need to lift up on this antenna, take our bracket, take our tri-wing, lift it up and out. You want to tuck this flex cable underneath this little piece sticking out. Comes the board. Now I find it easiest to take your retaining plate, fit it in just like that. No, I always forget this. So because of this brilliant design, you need to fit it in and under where the SIM tray goes, and then it's a matter of sort of folding back our flex cables. If it comes out, this is a pain in the ass. There. We want part of this flex cable. There we go. God darn it. You see what I mean? Brilliant design, Apple. There. This is the part where we take our standoff bit, start bolting down the board. Once that's done, we can come in, start connecting our flex cables. Now that that's done, we can come to the bottom. Start connecting. These flex cables. SIM tray. Wireless charger. Take your bracket, retaining plate, put that in place, take our standoff, take our Phillips, now typically with the wider cables you don't want to just press down in the middle, you want to press down left to right, right to left. Just makes it less likely to misalign. Now the front camera has a couple of pieces that help align, that makes sure this sits properly. You want to make sure to get this right, as if you press down too hard when you're reconnecting the screen, if for instance this is sitting on top, this is supposed to slot right in between here. If it's sitting on top, you can crack your display, which is obviously bad news. We don't want to have to replace that if we don't have to. Typically, I start by slotting this in. You want this flex to rest underneath. Then you tilt down. I don't know if I can get that on camera, but you want this piece to look just like that. Once that's done, we can reconnect. For our rear camera, now depending on if you did this in one stretch or not, honestly, even if you didn't, you want to make sure that there's no dust on either the lens. More than likely, if your camera was sitting down the whole time or in a plastic bag, there won't. But you just as easily could have. See, my frames come this way, which isn't an entirely bad thing, but there's a piece of plastic film. Now, if you have double-sided tape, it's far easier to do it this way. But to remove the film, I don't know if you can see this piece that just came out. Let's just say it's only annoying if you forget to check, because you go to connect everything just to find out that one of your cameras is blurry. So let's avoid that. Now, the rear camera bracket has these two little tabs that are supposed to sit, kind of just come in at a 90-degree angle, and they should sit in these little slots right along this metal rail right here. Two Phillips. Now we need some sort of double-sided tape to hold the battery down. Just like that. You don't need a lot. Now, in my opinion, these aren't entirely necessary. They certainly don't make your phone water resistant, so please don't go into it thinking that. But they will do one thing, which is keep the screen from tapping up against the body. So sometimes you'll get this clicking sound when you press on it or when you're texting. which, if you're picky like me, it's one of those things that'll just get on your nerves, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. Hopefully, if you got some sort of kit, it came with it. If not, I'll try to remember to put a link to some of these parts. Now, sometimes they come out, you lift off this piece, and the adhesive stays in place. Sometimes it doesn't. Now, usually I drop the battery in. Then I put in I connect the screen. The last thing you connect is the battery. We take our retaining plates, our tri-point, usually I align one corner first, then the other. And go back around, make sure you tighten your screws properly. Last but not least, battery retaining flex. I'm sorry, the battery retaining plate. How did I say flex? Battery retaining plate. Once that's in, it won't come disconnected. Then we can remove our adhesive. The reason I do it this way is sometimes it can be a huge pain in the neck to drop the battery in and then realign this particular flex if it's too high or too low. So I find it far easier to connect, put the plate down, then lift up the adhesive and call it a day. Like I said, if for whatever reason your camera isn't sitting right, you just as easily can damage it upon reconnecting everything. This particular customer is about to trade in their phone to AT&T, and apparently AT&T doesn't care for their trade-in promotion if the screen is damaged, which is why I'm reinstalling a broken screen. You want to make sure, so pretend like if your screen is if you're reusing your screen or reinstalling a new one, you want to make sure that the bezel doesn't sit too high. If it is sitting too high, open it up again. Make sure that your front camera isn't sitting on top or is misaligned, because like I said, you just as easily can damage it. I have done it several times. I have learned the hard way. Snap it in place. And we finish it off with our pentalobes. Voila. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching.